Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Real Estate Life. Thanks for being here. We are doing this on a weekly basis, and my name is Rob Edgerly. I'm the founder and CEO at Maine Life Real Estate, and I'm joined today by Kim Tarbox, who's our president of our team. And today we have a special guest. We have Darryl Chandler with Focused Property Inspections. And we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Daryl's definitely seen a lot of home inspections, and he will be enlightening us with some stories, and we can ask questions and go through what the good, the bad, and the ugly of these home inspections are. So Daryl, I've known Daryl for almost 15 years. He has inspected my personal residence. He's inspected a condo that we had purchased, other like the building that we're in now. And not only that, but I think he's pretty much the only person I would trust to send my clients to. And he's grown. I have him listed as a home inspector and an entrepreneur, because he not only is he a home inspector, but he's grown a great business out of his Gorham hometown. And now I noticed, Daryl, you're in Texas as well. Congratulations! I know you've been working on expanding your business. So we're excited that you're here today. Daryl, you want to jump on and give
Sure.
Tell us what did I miss?
Not much. I've been in the business for 26 years now. We've got 11 home inspectors here out of our Gorham office. We've got offices in Texas. We work out of New Hampshire as well. And we have an environmental services business that does decontaminations. Like I said, 26 years of doing it. Seen a lot of it. I teach nationally now. Matter of fact, as soon as this Zoom call's over, I am heading to Arkansas to spend some time down there teaching as well.
Awesome.
Look forward to answering you guys' questions.
Awesome. Okay, great. We'll get into the mitigation side of things. I didn't know that was something that you were doing, so you can give us an announcement on that. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through. We just did some intros. Obviously, we're here talking with Darryl Chandler from Focused Property Inspections. We'll have Q&A. We can ask some questions. We'll prime the pump with some questions. We'll take a look at, what are our action steps for all of us at the end of this. I'm sure we'll come up with a couple of things that we want to talk about, go through some final thoughts. And then I always leave a line at the bottom of an agenda open so that we can add in anything. Is there anything for folks who are on the call that you'd like to make sure we talk about? And same goes for you, Daryl. It sounds like one of those things might be the mitigation services that you've got. Anything else anybody would like to add in? You can jump onto audio and let us know now, or type something in the chat. All right. So with that, we can always add things later on. But Daryl, why don't we start by, I guess the first question I have, and I'm going to stop sharing here so we can I can see everybody. What's the number one issue that you see come up at home inspections that we should be thinking about as real estate agents?
Statistically, the number one thing that home inspectors find are electrical issues. Most people think that they can easily do electrical. They run power from one point to the next, and the fan works or the AC works, but they don't take in consideration the impact that you're having to all the other systems that you're tying into, the size of the wire, the size of the breaker, the amount of draw that's going to cross that. So a happy homeowner does their own electrical work. Everything's working fine, not realizing that they've actually created an unsafe situation by ungrounding or overamping or things of that nature. So the number one thing that we find is electrical. The number one thing that ends up in a lawsuit for home inspectors and for realtors as far as inspections go is structural issues. And they could be anything from decks to framing to foundations so the number one problem we find, electrical. The number one lawsuit that you see is structural. A lot of the structural can't be investigated. That's why.
So when you say a lawsuit, so what's an example of that? Sounds like the ugly here.
That is the ugly, yes.
what's how does that affect you and us, and in that whole, maybe you have an example of something where that came up, or maybe you don't, but that's just the number one thing.
Right, right. Because I teach nationally, I'm exposed to a lot of different numbers, and that number one lawsuit being structural, and it's because it's the highest price. To fix an electrical issue, you can wire a whole house for $6,000-7,000 just about. To fix a structural issue, it gets into much more than that, especially if it's a foundation and things along that nature. However, having said that, just because that's the number one reason why inspectors are sued, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people win. Okay. A good 90% of lawsuits filed against inspectors each year are found to have no merit at all. The average payout is less than $1,200. So that gives you an idea of how good the industry actually has become over years, is that they don't miss much. They don't miss much. And when they do miss something, it ends up being a very small thing, because home inspections are not going to be able to find every little deficiency with a property. It's humanly impossible to do that. The idea behind a home inspection is to be able to find the systemic issues and not necessarily the isolated issues.
One, we have a mix of people on the call, people that have been, that are newly in the business, some that are just getting their license, and some that have been doing this for 10 years. I guess a quick overview of the services that you provide and what you usually see, starting with the general building inspection. In 30 seconds, what does that all cover?
Well, most home inspectors, especially ours, use the standards set forth by ASHI, which is the American Society of Home Inspectors, and INTERNACHI, which is the International Association of Certified Home Inspectors. It's the two national trade organizations that set the standards and govern home inspections throughout the country. So there are literally thousands of things, but the big ticket items are going to be electrical, plumbing, heating, structural systems, things along that nature, doors, windows, siding, exterior, along that nature right there. They get away from cosmetic issues or personal preference issues. There's multiple ways to do things. As long as it falls within the standards, it passes during the inspection. So it's hard to nail it all down in one actual, thing, because there's so many things that they do check. So the idea would be, if someone's interested in those standards, would be go to ASHI's website, ashi.org, or INTERNACHI's website, and look at the scope of inspections, realizing that the inspection is a visual, non-invasive review of the ready accessible areas and systems. So it's visual. The inspector is not supposed to be doing any ripping, tearing, punching holes in walls, removing insulation, things along that nature. If they suspect something's there, they may move insulation, but that's about as invasive as they get. Right.
So, for instance, if somebody goes into a house and they suspect that there's mice, or they suspect that there's some water damage behind a wall, should we expect that you're going to open that wall up?
Yeah, the answer to that is no. That brings up another thing. The inspection does have limitations too, okay? So rodents and pests are outside the scope of a general home inspection. So are things like mold. Mold's outside of the scope of a general home inspection. However, if an inspector sees those signs of pest or carpenter ants or mold, they'll tag it as suspected infestation, possible infestation. And that's when you bring in the next level up. That's when you bring in the exterminator. That's when you bring in the pest control companies and things along that nature to deal with those issues.
Right.
Well, I have a question. What are you seeing as far as what we could, as agents, could be doing better in the respect of timelines, and given the current market? I know it always seems like we're running against our deadline. What's the best practice around that?
Yeah, the best practice out there is to make sure that you get a qualified person doing your inspections. Don't sacrifice your timeline to get somebody. You want a quality person. And I'll give you an example, right? I got 11 guys. We're booked out probably about 10 days right now. During the busy season, we're booked out 2 to 3 weeks. And what will happen is you guys get so busy that you guys decide to go with a 5-day window to make your offer more appealing. However, you can't find somebody of competency sometimes during the busy season in that short window time. Right. You want a short window time, do it in the off season when it can be a short window time. And you don't have to sacrifice using a qualified individual but just an available individual. That's the first problem that we see. The second problem we see is setting the expectation. And I guess that's kind of part of the setting the expectation with your client, letting them know what a home inspection actually is and what it actually does and what it does not do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And encourage them to educate themselves about the limitations of a home inspection, because a home inspection isn't all encompassing. It is not. Like I just got done saying, if you had mold remediation at that particular property and you want mold done, it's not part of a general home inspection. Do most home inspection companies offer some kind of service added on to that? Yes, they do. But you've got to ask for that. It just doesn't all of a sudden just show up and you have it done. It's sort of like a water test. The water test isn't part of a general home inspection. However, if you have a well, most home inspectors do provide that service and you have to add that on. So setting the expectations is an important one. In that class that I teach, we do a whole half-hour section on just how to set the expectations for a home inspection.
Great.
Gotcha. What's a typical home inspection cost right now?
Well, it's based on square footage for us. Some companies do it based on square footage plus age and all kinds of variable factors, but your baseline is going to start right around $400 for a general home inspection. Now, keep in mind that it goes up for the square footage added above and beyond a certain square footage. I can't speak for all home inspection companies, but ours does up to 2,000 square feet for $400. After that, we add $100 for every 1,000 square feet.
Okay, great. And then you got a septic inspection.
Correct. So you got to worry about the ancillaries. And ancillary services are the services that can be added to a home inspection that are outside the scope of a home inspection. A home inspection is just designed to do every house, but not every house has a city sewer line. Not every house has a septic. Not every house has a well. So those are all ancillary services that are added on to a home inspection at an additional fee. Most of the time that involves lab costs to the inspector as well. So there's an additional fee for that. If you're on city sewer, you don't want to have a septic inspection, but you might want to consider having the sewer line scoped, which is a little bit less expensive than doing a septic inspection, but it takes less time too. Yeah, that sewer scope. That's
something that I don't know if everybody's recommending, but it's you only want to get burned once on that, and not have that done before. You make sure that it's part of your checklist.
The old standard used to be anything before 1970 you would have done, because it's either going to be cast iron or clay, correct? So we used to recommend that anything before 1970, you're on city sewer, get it done, because there's a lot of deterioration that's going to happen into the clay and the cast iron. We're finding it about 10 to 15% of modern day pipes are actually in failure as well. And as new as 2012, 2014 are having issues. Now, having said that, most of those issues should have been experienced by the seller. So the sellers should have known that they were having backups. So the sellers should have known that they were snaking the line on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Those aren't normal things. If you're doing that once every 6 months, there's a problem with your line somewhere, a dip or crack or break or root infiltration that needs to be addressed, because just clearing the line every 6 months is not the right fix. So we're finding about 15% of modern lines are actually failing in some sort. So now we recommend it. We just offer it to everybody. For a couple $100 that it costs versus the $8,000 to $10,000 it costs to fix that problem. It's a very small investment.
Daryl, what can a seller do to aid in the inspection process?
Again, that goes back to the realtor setting the proper expectations. Now, there's a couple of things that the seller can do. Make sure that there's access to all of the pertinent areas, like the basements, the electrical panels, the attic, clean that closet out, have that easily accessible, because the inspector is not supposed to be moving any personal belongings. That's the first thing, setting the proper expectation. That includes letting the seller know the proper expectation of time. Ashley says that home inspection should take 3 to 5 hours. Okay.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, I know. You say that, but let's take an 1890s 4 unit. That's probably going to go 5 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you understand that when they say 3 to 5 hours, they're talking the spectrum of, it should be about 3 hours, but you can have some that go 4 or 5. You get a 200-year-old farmhouse, might be a 4-hour inspection. So you gotta plan for that. Now, if it's a 2010 home, obviously that's going to be closer to the 3 hour, might even be 2.5. So you want to make sure, because they've got kids getting off the school bus, they've got animals that need to be taken care of, things
Yeah.
along that nature. So setting the proper expectation is important.
Yeah, that's
And also identifying where the septic system is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 9 times out of 10, it's wrong when they put that stick out there and we spend a half hour chasing that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
No. Some people know right where it is, and if that's great, put it right there, mark it. It makes the job easier, you know. And obviously letting them know about what closed house condition means for radon placements, because I don't know how many times we show up and the windows are still open.
Mm-hmm.
all right. So yeah, so those of you that have checklists in your part of your systems, making sure that you have a letter that goes out to your clients to tell them about what to expect, timing. That one about in closets where you see an attic scuttle that's in a closet and there's all kinds of stuff in there. I mean, we've seen that blow up on us a few times, where that's an extra half an hour of moving stuff out of the closet, you know. And then your client's usually really ticked off because they didn't know it and they would have rather not everybody not have gone through their closets. So
Yeah, you don't know what kind of personal stuff is up there, and the last thing you want to be doing is moving somebody's ashes. You know what I mean? Or moving 200-year-old china that's been passed down from generations. There's just so many variables that it's easier to educate the people and have the expectations set and have the closet cleared before you get there.
Totally, yeah. All right, Kim, you got another question, or let's go to everybody. Anybody else have a question?
I do have another question.
Okay, hold on. Let's see if anybody else has got some questions. Anybody got a question they're burning desire to ask?
Yeah, this is the time to ask all the questions that you may feel that are silly because you don't want to ask them in front of your clients.
And when those questions do pop up, you can still ask me after the inspection. Give me a call. Even if it's not our inspection, we'll answer the question the best we can. I've got good working relationships with just about every home inspection company.
Looks like Jason's got a question.
Yeah, I got a question. In regards to, oh, good grief, I just drew a blank. I just drew a complete blank.
Well, we can come right back around because
let me think about it just for a second.
Yeah. Here's another question. Just cut in on me when you're ready, Jason. But I get asked this all the time? Should the buyer's agent be there?
Oh yeah.
Should the seller's agent be there? Should one of the sellers actually be there? What's your thought on that?
Well, legally, there's nothing you can do about the sell side. The sell side owns the property. They can be there if they want to be there. Okay. So you don't have a stance to ask them to leave. Like in the old days, we used to ask them just to wait outside or leave or whatever. Do we like it that way? Ideally, we would like to have a secure, safe environment that has open dialogue between the client and the inspectors so that they can feel free to ask any questions. Having the seller there sometimes hampers that, especially when the seller gets emotionally attached to the property and maybe the emotional attachment is far greater than the physical characteristics of the property. And so when you point something out, they have a laundry list of excuses of why it's that way. And it just adds a lot of time onto the inspection because you have to deal with the emotions of the seller, not just the buyer. We're there to educate the buyer about, let's just say the person has a 1970s ranch and I'm trying to explain there's no GFCI protection and the seller decides to get really upset about that and, and adversarial. It happens. And unfortunately, it's really not that big of a deal to get adversarial over, but everybody's on pins and needles through the process. So any little spark kind of sets them on edge a little bit. And then you have to deal with backing them down, explaining, all this, and it really steals time away from the buyer who's actually paying for that information and that service.
Right.
Makes sense. How about the agents?
I strongly recommend the buyer's agent to be there because you all know that the report's going to read very black and white. It doesn't say, yeah, this is going, this is just a small deal. That it doesn't sound like that on paper, right? It's either acceptable, marginal, not inspected, not present, or defective, right? Well, no GFCIs is a defect. Okay. However, it's a $12 fix. You know what I mean? So it's really not that big of a deal. you don't read it that way when you read it in the paper. It's very black and white when you read the report. So having both the buyer and the buyer's agent there keeps everybody on the same page about actually helping them set priority. What's going to be asked for, what's not going to be asked for.
Gotcha.
All right, I remember my question now.
All right.
It actually was right along the same lines as yours. And that is, are you seeing more and more, I've had on a lot of occasions, a buyer hire an inspector and just say, go do the thing and bring me the report. I don't need to be there. Do you have a preference either way on that? I mean, would you just as soon do the inspection and hand over the report to a buyer who's not there? And then have you seen a change in that? People getting more comfortable as we do our social distancing thing with just hiring an inspector, maybe even waiting in their car and just being like, go do your thing. Let me know if let me know if the foundation is junk or whatever. And then I've got a follow-up question after that.
Okay. So when you're dealing with a person who's bought multiple homes or high-end homes and along that nature, a lot of the times they don't show up, or they show up for 5 or 10 minutes and then they're gone. They show up just enough time to make their measurements and they're gone. These are usually professionals who rely on professionals on every aspect of their life. Okay. And so we're just one more professional that they're relying on to get this. They may be a CEO that relies on attorneys to get this information done, accountants to get this information done, and they make decisions based on professionals all the time. When you get to somebody who's not used to using professionals on a daily basis, they have a little bit more direct control in aspects of their lives, and therefore they want to be there. They want to be there. They want to be there. To be honest with you, either way works fine for us. It really has a lot to do with the client and how they feel, what they need to get out of it. Okay. If this is a CEO of a company that doesn't want to be there because their time can be best spent doing something else, then so be it. If it's a client who really needs that education, feels like they want to be there, then I encourage that too, because you're going to learn so much more being there. We've got a process that we go down. That process doesn't take into account what Mrs. Smith wants to ask. It just goes down through a process. If Mrs. Smith is there, then she can ask that question and get it answered in more detail. We'll even venture outside the scope of a home inspection and try to answer some questions too. They don't show up in the report because it's outside of the scope of what we do, but it might help Mrs. Smith know that, okay, this is not a weight-bearing wall and we can knock this out and make this one room. Or is this a weight-bearing wall? Those are things that don't show up in the inspection. Does that wall pass or fail? It passes. Doesn't answer the question whether it's weight-bearing or not. Mrs. Smith might want to know that.
Right. All right. Yeah, that's a very good insight. I think as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that totally rings through. And then my next one is, do you ever have any conversation with your inspectors about, if I've had a couple of occasions where an inspector's been on the property, and pretty clearly early on, they didn't like the property for some reason, like the inspector didn't like it. And I'm walking around with my buyer and I'm listening to the inspector's sort of commentary and mumbling about the property. And I don't think they even realized it. I don't think it was an intentional, vicious thing, but it was clear that there was some disdain about the property. I'm thinking of one in particular this last year. Do you have any coaching or any, how as a buyer agent, is there a way that I can sort of guide that in a way that's, I don't know, I don't want to say pragmatic, but diplomatic, let's say. Use some diplomacy there to kind of up the game, focus on the details. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I understand. First and foremost, I hope it wasn't one of my guys, but if it was one of my guys, our quality assurance team calls the agent and calls the client after the inspection's performed. Now, having said that, it's hard to put your personal opinions and perceptions aside, but most of the guys out there can do that on a regular basis because every property is an opportunity. Okay. Every property is an opportunity. And that's what you got to realize. That's what the inspector is going to realize is it's an opportunity. I don't need to know what the price is, but if I'm inspecting a house that I'm not into, it's not I'm just here calls them balls and strikes. Does it have peeling paint? You know what I mean? Is the foundation good? Is the walls good? Is the roof good? Are the windows good? I'm going through a checklist of things of what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. I've fixed and flipped a lot of houses in my time. So it really boils down to value. right? If you're buying this house for $1, you expect to do a lot of repairs to it. If you're buying it for $1 million, you expect it to be pretty close to perfect. Well, most real estate transactions are between those two scenarios, and the inspector is not privy to that. I don't know what the assets or the capabilities of the buyer is, but I don't need that to do my job. You know, I don't need to go through there and say, well, if my personal opinion doesn't matter, is what I'm getting at. It's really the personal opinion of the buyer. The buyer is going to get a list of deficiencies, marginals, and accepts that they've got to decide whether what they're paying for the property warrants the time investment and return for the value that they're getting. You know, and a personal opinion be set aside. That's what good inspectors are supposed to do. And frankly, there are very few times where I was asked a personal opinion. And before I ask a personal opinion, I always ask a lot of qualifying questions like, do you have any construction experience? You know what I mean? If you were to buy this house and they weren't to fix this issue, do you have the financial resources to take care of that, or the skill sets to take care of that? And if they're asking coaching questions at that particular point in time, which are way outside the scope of a home inspection. But sometimes the realtor and or the client's going to bring you into that. And then, you know, you've got to maybe 4 or 5 times in my whole entire 26 years of doing this that I've told people that, you know, my honest opinion about the property based on the circumstances that they're in. And, you know, most of the time that is, of course, it's usually the realtor asking. Most of the time that's welcomed and received quite nicely. But if you're not asked for that opinion, the inspector should not be inflicting that opinion at all. It's balls and strikes. They've got a list of standards and a procedure that they're supposed to follow. They don't have to count how many windows. They just got to note the ones that are bad. They don't have to count every door. They just got to note the ones that don't work. They don't have to give a personal opinion about whether they would buy the property or not buy the property. If that was the case, I would only be able to inspect properties in Gorham because that's where I live. People ask me all that all the time. Would you buy this property? I go, nope. They go, why? It's in Buxton. My kids go to Gorham. That's the humor I use to get around that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've all been on that walkthrough with the inspector, and certainly I haven't seen that with Daryl or Daryl's crew, but I definitely have had those times where I guess that's why I haven't been with them for a while, because we stopped using them. Because
Daryl, that was nobody on your crew. It was,
yeah.
But I mean, it's a tough one because like you're walking around with your client, you're like, you are really doing some damage to my deal here, and these guys are over the moon about this property, and he's got a good skill set, you know.
Yeah, you know more about the deal than the inspector does. The inspector is just there to establish condition. That's it. That's our established condition. You're there to help the client establish priority. What is important, what isn't important, right? You know what was disclosed already. Like, they already disclosed the bad roof. Well, if the inspector is already down on this property because it's got a bad roof, you've already worked that through, and you already know that, and the buyer already knows that. If he gets down on this property because it's got a bad roof and he's just bad mouthing it all the way through, that's not his job, because he doesn't know, or she doesn't know, what is already transpired between the communications of the parties. You do, and your client does, and how much the price is. Maybe they're getting this for $50,000 under value. If that's the case, then buy this thing. I don't care if it is in Buxton. And I don't mean to poo-poo on Buxton, but you know, I don't care where it is at that point. If you've got $50,000 worth of swing equity already the minute you close, I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Right. That was a great question. And the question right before that, that Jason asked is one that's, and Kim, I promise I won't go off on this for a long time, but I have a friend in the business out in Milwaukee, and it is their custom to not go to home inspections. It's their team's custom. They will set it up with once they go under contract, they will actually facilitate the booking of the inspection and get the inspector in and send the inspector to do it. And the agent will not go. The clients could go, but at the end of the day, once the inspection comes back, it comes into their team administrator and they have a special person that only negotiates all of their inspection items. And what it does is it puts a buffer in between the agent from being there and commenting on things, because there's a little bit of liability, I think, if we're there saying, if the inspector notes something and then we're there explaining in a way, don't worry about that, that'll be fine. We have some liability that, like, why would I go in and override what Daryl says? Daryl's the expert. So let the third party go in there and do that. I think it's a really interesting, not only do I want to save the time of not having to go to a 3-hour inspection, but it's an interesting thought when you think about, okay, let's just put this on the experts and let the third party do it and then have it come back to us later on. I don't think that's, and that's a differing opinion out in his market, and I think that's differing here, but a couple of times
I wonder if
it's worked.
I wonder if it wouldn't be worthwhile to just ask the client the question, like, look, because you've got a couple that he's a craftsman, he's a DIY guy, and he's got his skill set. She's a manager. They're buying a duplex. They know what they're getting into. Ask the question, is it worthwhile for me? Like, would you prefer for me to be with you, kind of on your shoulder at the inspection, or do you prefer to be hands off, and sort of have the policy be maybe that's their option? You can show up and sit in your car and make your calls and do whatever you're doing. If they don't want you there, or if they do want some hand holding, like in the basement because they don't know systems or whatever whatever that question is.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I love that idea.
I'm going to jump in here real quick because we operate down in Texas as well. And in Texas, the agents don't come at all. Okay. And in Texas, once you picked your home inspector, the home inspector sets up the time, the home inspector organizes the pest inspection and all the other inspection services that go with it. And their agents stay right out of it altogether. You can't do that here in Maine. And I'll tell you why you can't do that here in Maine. We're not licensed. Okay. And by not being licensed, that we have no authority to go into a house. The authority of going into the house comes from your licensing that you guys have. You can be a home inspector here in the state of Maine and not have a background check. You can't quite be a realtor without having that. You see what I'm saying? So there has to be a licensed individual that actually is in control of the property, even during the inspection process, because you're there on behalf of the buyer. And believe it or not, you're there on behalf of the seller. Your job and your fiduciary responsibility to the transaction is to protect the property. You can't allow your buyer to steal the goldfish tank and take it out and put it in the car, right? Can't allow the home inspector to do it either. The only licensed individual in the transaction at this particular point in time is the agent.
That's an interesting take on it as well. So that begs the question: why aren't you licensed? And how close are we to having inspectors be licensed?
Well, we killed it in this last legislative session, and I see some pluses and minuses to licensing. The bill that they proposed was horrid. Okay, we wrote a bill 21 years ago that was about 15 pages long. That was a really, really good bill. This bill here was a page and a half, and it gave all the authority to the director of professional liability and finance or something like that, Ann Head, who's the director right now. She's a great person, does a great job up there. She actually sided with us that it's not something that office should be taking on at this particular point in time, especially the way it's written. If it was written more in lines of where the real estate board is written, where you have a commission with realtors that are appointed to the board, a member of the public that's appointed to the board, a member of the legislature that's appointed to the board, and someone from the Attorney General's office that's appointed to the board, with the majority of the seats being held by professionals who have been in the industry for 5 or more years, now you've got some legitimacy. When you put all of the authority into a political appointee, then they can make demands on the industry that aren't within the scopes of the existing industry. We see this in states like Mexico and New Mexico, sorry, not the country, and out Midwest, where they did that. And what happens is they start making up their own standards. Well, then the insurance companies pull out of the state because they're making up standards that aren't nationalized, or making up standards that haven't had actuaries go through to figure out what the loss is going to be and things like that. And so the industry ends up imploding on itself because it doesn't have any insurance backing. So we got to be very, very careful about how we move forward with licensing. The other thing licensing does is it tends to drive up cost. New Hampshire license back in 2009, home inspections went from 300 to 400 bucks real quick. So, and that makes it hard for people who are already on the fence about getting home inspected, the first time home buyers and things along that nature. And the reason why it does that is it whacks out competition, because a lot of people who are doing, less than 50 or 60 home inspections a year will get out of the industry because they can't afford the licensing or the insurance, because it does drive up insurance as well. So it's a very touchy situation. I see people all the time. I don't know how many free septic inspections I've done, because I get there to do the home inspection and I say, why didn't you do the septic? And they say, well, they're going to pump it for us and, we just can't afford it. I'm like, well, you can't afford not to. So I tell my guys, you ever come across a situation like that, you do it, because you're only setting that person up for failure. If you can set that person up for success, then they're going to be a friend for life. You let them fail once and they're going to remember you, but not in a good light. They're going to remember the realtor. When everything goes bad, they point fingers. When everything goes good, they forget who was there.
Yeah.
Kim's laughing.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, if for anybody on our team that's on this call, like, never let somebody buy a house without a septic inspection.
You always got to do the right thing. And if you come to work and you serve the industry is going to serve you. If you come to work to serve yourself and your self-interest, you're not going to last in this industry. People are not going to want to work with you, first off, and second off, you're going to get sued right out of this industry. You have to do what's right. Even if you weren't hired to do it or say it or be it, you still have to do what's right. You got to set the consumer up for success. And if you do, they'll refer you and refer you and refer you and refer you. If you don't, they'll never refer you. They'll badmouth you, and it'll make it. One person out there talking bad about you is, can ruin your network pretty quickly.
Absolutely. What other questions do we have for Daryl?
Daryl, what's the difference between a boiler and a furnace?
No, I'm glad you asked. Anyone want to answer that question? Can anybody know? Has anybody been told? Has anybody come to the class? Kim's been caught a couple of times. All right. So boilers heat water, furnaces heat air. That's the short and simple of it. Anything that heats and blows air is a furnace. Okay. Anything that heats and distributes water for the purpose of heating is a boiler. Even though not all boilers boil the water. So in the old days, boilers actually boiled it and turned it into steam, and the steams went up through the pipe, right? Today, most forced hot water boilers, so there's two types of boilers. There's the steam boiler that just still operates on that principle, and there's the forced hot water, which heats it up anywhere from 120 to 180 degrees, depending on what type of boiler you have, and circulates it out through the house.
Kim,
So to clarify, a forced hot water baseboard heating system is a boiler.
Correct. It's heating water.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Maine, we call everything furnaces. Furnace. Everybody calls furnace. Hey, down with the furnace. Even that little switch says furnace on it, right? The red switch.
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
Hey, Daryl, it's Paige. I have a question for you. I just went through an inspection with another company, and they didn't look at the roof. I mean, it was a pretty thorough inspection, but there was no documentation on the roof. And he also said that he's not supposed to like unscrew anything. So he had to get underneath like a crawl space to access part of the sewer pipe. Is that typical? I mean, I know that you guys typically get on the roof as much as possible. So basically my client's like, well, now I have no information about this particular part of the house. How common is that? And what would you recommend as far as, if we needed a second opinion?
Okay. Why didn't he inspect the roof?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, so you can inspect the roof without walking the roof. We don't walk every single roof. Obviously, you're not going to walk a 10 or a 12 pitch roof. You can use binoculars. You can put a ladder to the eaves. If we can walk it, we like to walk it because you can see so much more walking it. But you have to know in the standards how you inspected the roof. It doesn't say not inspect the roof. You have to know how you inspected the roof. Visual from a window, visual from the ground, ladder to the eaves, walk the roof, okay? So in the standards, you have to know how you inspected the roof. Then you have to give a grade for the roof. If you can't do any of that, you have to say not inspected and give a reason why you didn't inspect it. So not inspected, 14 inches of snow on roof at time of inspection, recommend homeowner removing snow and having the inspector come back free of charge to re-inspect the roof. That's exactly what it says in mine. when I can't do it because I'm not supposed to shovel the roof because I could damage the shingles as well. So having said that, if they didn't inspect it, they have to mark it as not inspected and give you a reason why. If they're following ASHI and NACHI standards. Now, if they're not following ASHI and NACHI standards, it's whoever they want. My recommendation would be probably not to use in this guy if they're not following either ASHI or NACHI recommendation, ASHI or NACHI standards.
They were ASHI qualified. I'm just going back through. I think he claimed to look at it from the ground. So I'm just going through the inspection.
Okay, so there should be a grade there then.
Yeah, so he did a visual inspection, limited in scope by yeah. It says general pictures of the roof, but he basically just like backed up in the lawn and took photographs.
And he didn't tell you whether it was acceptable, marginal, not inspected, not present? I mean.
It says inspected from the ground with binoculars, camera zoom. It just says life expectancy within typical life.
Okay, so he's passing it. He's just doing a narrative versus a checklist pass.
Okay.
See, in ASHI standards as well as NACHI standards, you can't be just checklist. You can't just check a box, acceptable, not inspected, not present. You could be checklist narrative or narrative. So if he's saying inspected and he's giving you a narrative and he's not listing any deficiencies, then he has passed the roof.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he does mention some things like the entire underside of the roof sheathing is not inspected for evidence of leakage. Evidence of prior leakage may be disguised by interior finishes. Leakage can develop at any time, blah, blah, blah. Please also refer to visual inspection agreement for a detailed explanation of the scope of this agreement, of this inspection.
Right, so there was no access to the attic at the time of inspection?
No, so he did access the attic, but he didn't go up on top of the roof.
Right.
So, and then the other thing was, so there was a crawl space underneath an addition that he had to basically unscrew a panel so that he could access the sewer pipe.
Yep.
And, you know, he was like, technically I'm not allowed to do this, but it was the only way that we could access the sewer pipe. And, you know, so he was kind of giving me a hard time about that. And I think he felt rushed as well because he mentioned several times that he was already over his time limit.
Yeah, that's not your problem. You're paying for an inspection. Like I said, it's at the beginning of this, an inspection time period is supposed to be from 3 to 5 hours. Now we know most of them don't take 5 hours, they take 3 hours, but you've got to allot that time because you don't know when you get there exactly what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with, you can surmise based on the age of the house and the size of the house, it might take a little longer than the 3 hour mark. But for the most part, when you get there, the inspector should have that time set aside for the client so that the client can have the inspection done thoroughly. And if you can't do a thorough inspection, perhaps maybe they need to reschedule for them to come back and do the crawl space. Having said that, if the hatch is only screwed on and the screws aren't painted in or sealed in and the door's not sealed in, the inspector is to open that door. Just like they are to take the front off the electrical panel, okay? Just like they are to unscrew the access to the attic if it's screwed shut. Okay, if it's a door or an access panel designed to be opened and has not been caulked or painted or sealed shut, then they are to open it and access it. Now, with crawl spaces as well as attics, technically the opening is supposed to be 18 by 24 inches, and that's for safety purposes. You don't want anybody squeezing through. You see, some of my guys are pretty big boys, right? You don't want them squeezing through a basement window, right, to go inspect the crawl space. It should be an actual crawl space access of proper size.
Yes, it was, but he was having a really hard time opening it. And so basically it took him a lot longer to access the panel. And I think that he was just, you know, frustrated. It was taking a lot of time and, you know, I don't know. So my clients were just feeling a little disappointed that they probably didn't get like everything that they wanted, because when they got the report back, they were like, oh gosh, I don't think that this was as thorough as it should have been. You know, I've gone through the report. I do think it was as thorough as it should have been. So anyway,
it sounds like the bedside manner of the inspector just didn't meet the expectation of the client. It sounds like the inspector may have performed their responsibilities, but just didn't do enough education to the client.
Yeah.
Now, if is that a multi-inspector company?
Yes.
I would reach out to the owner.
Okay.
You know,
All right. Thank you.
It may be a one-off day for that inspector, which fine, everybody has those one-off days. That's great. But if it's
Mhm.
not, at least that the owner can, you know, start making some kind of training regimen to help this person along.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much.
Good
Yep.
advice. Let's see.
Hey, Daryl, do you guys, you know, I mean, we're in Maine. We've got a lot of older inventory. When you come across asbestos, lead, mold, do you actually call it what it is, or do you make a guess as to what it is, or like what's your process if you see some, you know, some paint that's obviously got the sort of customary gator look, and then secondly, are you looking in the yard for oil fills from old buried oil tanks and things along those lines as you're doing your inspections?
Okay, so first off, we have the 7th oldest housing stock in the country. Okay, so we have a lot of old houses, and we're going to see a lot of this stuff. Okay, asbestos, lead, mold are all outside the scope of a general home inspection. However, like I said earlier in this conversation, if the inspector comes across these environmental conditions or suspects these environmental conditions, they should tag it and recommend further evaluation. A lot of the time, lead paint's easy, especially if it's peeling, right, or flaky, right? You grab a piece of that lead paint, you grab a piece of white paper, and you go like this, and if it makes a nice little pencil mark, you know you got lead paint there, right? That's just a quick down and dirty way. It's not the official way. Quick down and dirty way to test lead paint. If lead paint's not peeling or no paint's peeling whatsoever, it's not the inspector's job to call that out. It's not. If it's peeling, it's a different story, okay? But if it's not peeling, it's not the inspector's job to call that out. Asbestos, asbestos wrap, asbestos 9x9 floor tiles, vermiculite insulation, if seen by the inspector, should be noted in the report. Again, doesn't have to be, okay? But there's nothing in the standards that doesn't allow the inspector to go above and beyond their standards. They have to do their minimum standards. The only true way to know whether those things have asbestos is obviously test them, you know? So as far as the oil tank situation goes, the buried oil tanks, there's absolutely no way for us to, you know, if we see an indent in the ground and we see 2 pipes coming up out of the ground, which is a traditional sign of the old buried oil tanks, we'll tag that, you know, put that in there. But again, that buried oil tanks and buried tanks are specifically excluded from ASHI and NACHI, just because a lot of people cut those pipes off and left them there.
So
Hey, Jason,
you don't.
oh, sorry.
Sorry, Kim.
I was
so
just
you
gonna say
don't.
there. Oh, go
Go
ahead.
Welcome to Zoom.
Go ahead.
ahead.
You ask your question, I'll do the follow-up.
All right, just the final little bit of the question on the oil tank. Is there a space on your report for that, or do you just kind of turn to your client and say, you know, you may want to take a look at that? Is there something official that you notify, like observed in the yard, indent and traditional, you know, two filler pipes?
They can put that under the heating system if they want to, because that's where we evaluate oil tanks. You know what I mean? It's under the heating system. So they can put that under the heating system if they wanted to. Again, buried tanks are way outside the scope of a home inspection, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to see them. I think I've seen them maybe 3 times in the 26 years of me being here and doing this. And all 3 times they had the pipes coming up still. And that's the only way you could, and they all happen to be in Portland actually too. So.
I would say, Jason, there is a website through the maine.gov that if it's a oil tank that has been registered with the DEP, it's supposed to be on that site. I've found it helpful, especially there's actually a multi-unit in Old Orchard that my in-law told me that when he was growing up, it was a auto shop, and now there's like condos on top.
Mm-hmm.
So lo and behold, there's some registered tanks in there.
Yeah,
So.
sure.
What other kind of questions do we have? We're about 9 minutes from the end here, so. What's the number one question you're usually asked, Daryl?
At the home inspection by the client?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you buy this property? I hear that all the time. Would you buy this property? And my answer is always no. And they say, why? I'd be like, it's in Auburn. I live in Gorham. It's too far of a commute. I use humor. You know what I mean? And then I go
what
into
if the property is in Gorham?
Well, then you answer that question with the dollar value versus return, right? If you're buying a 1,000,000 square foot home for $100, you expect to inherit a lot of problems because you're getting such a good deal. But if you're paying $1 million for a 100 square foot home, you expect that 100 square foot home to be perfect, right? Your transactions between those two scenarios. So it's up to you to decide whether there's value enough there for you want to proceed with this transaction. I recommend that you take the list that I'm going to provide as far as establishing the conditions, sit with your realtor and help establish the priority, and they can forge the direction forward for you. You know, at that point, they obviously have some kind of insecurity or they wouldn't have asked that question.
Right.
Daryl, it's Paige. I have another question. So same inspection that I was referring to earlier. So this house has vinyl siding and it dates back to 1880. The listing agent said that it had asbestos, that it contained asbestos, and now he's backtracking and he's like, oh, I should have said unknown. The vinyl siding is white, and in the back there are, you can see rusted nail marks all over the back of the house from where the nails are leaching through the siding. What would cause that? If there is asbestos, if there's not asbestos, what is the concern there? Because that was something that was not called out on the inspection, but my clients are very nervous now.
Right. So there's two ways to handle asbestos siding: removal, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's first and foremost, or second, encapsulation. So encapsulation is where they wrap it and go over it with vinyl and just leave it right where it is. The third, there is actually a third option. Don't do anything. Leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
It's been weathered enough that all the loose fibers have been washed away a long time ago. The asbestos siding was very popular from like the 1920s all the way up to the 1940 era, 1930s being like the heyday of asbestos siding. And when you take a look at a lot of this asbestos siding, it's in great shape, right? It lasts so well. That's why it was such a good siding. However, all the loose fibers that you've got to worry about have been washed away a long time ago. So the only problem becomes is if you decide to start cutting that stuff up now, if you start breaking that stuff up now, then you're going to throw those fibers up in the air and then you're going to breathe them. That's where it becomes the problem. So leaving it alone is an option. Encapsulation is an option, and removal is an option. It's up to the client to decide what they feel comfortable with. You know, my mom's house was built in 1880s or something like that. It had asbestos siding on it too. And when we redid it in the early 2000s, we encapsulated.
So you could encapsulate it even if it had the vinyl, you would just go over the vinyl siding that's existing?
Yep.
Okay.
Not the vinyl siding that's existing. You can't go over vinyl siding. You got to remove that vinyl siding.
Okay, because we're having a really difficult time trying to get estimates right now. Everybody's like booked solid, and you know, all of a sudden my clients are just like, well, you know, they're a young couple, this is their first home. You know, the agent said that there was asbestos siding underneath the vinyl, and with the nails like leaching, they're concerned, like, is asbestos being leached through these nail holes?
No, asbestos won't leach through the nail holes.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't deteriorate like, okay, so what's leaching through is actually iron from the nails that actually adhere to the asbestos siding. We used old steel nails, right? Or iron nails back in the day. And you probably went over and you got 1980 siding on there. And
yeah.
I'm just guessing, because 1980 siding, the vinyl siding breaks down with UV light. So if you touch it, you get like white chalk on your hand or whatever color the house is, that's what you get on your hand. That's because it's breaking down, and it becomes very porous at that particular point in time too. And so the rust from those nails can leach through, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the iron leaching through. What doesn't leach through and what doesn't break down is asbestos. It's a mineral found in the ground. It doesn't decay. That's why they used it. So that's not leaching through and that's not breaking down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, sounds like we could go on and on with different questions and different scenarios. And I think that's what it's really important as agents that we do ask these questions. So Daryl, would you come back on with us again in maybe a couple months and go through this again?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? Also, you know, we're getting the classes geared up to be online as well. We're getting those recertified from the state because they're only certified for live teaching right now. So we could offer that. It's a 3-hour credit class of Home Inspections 101 where you can answer a lot of these questions. The other thing is my phone is always open. If you can't get a hold of me, I recommend you call in the office first, and then, you know, Andy, Paul, any of the guys here can answer questions and do the best for you as far as any question whatsoever. If you had the inspection with, whoop, something just went crazy. Rob, you sharing your screen again? There you go. any questions what you have, whether it's our inspection or not, we'd be more than happy to help you through it.
Awesome. Cool.
Daryl, also, I just wanted to just really give you props for that app that you guys have created. Really, like, totally ahead of the curve in your industry with that. And I know I greatly appreciate it, because nothing's worse than trying to do 5 different things at once and schedule an inspection and make calls and then have everybody tell you that they can't do it when I can just go on my phone and see when you guys are available. It's like a no-brainer. Thank you so much.
So what Kim's talking about is an app that we have that you can put right on your phone, so that when you're with your clients and you finally go into contract, you just open up that app and say, okay, here are all the available times and all the available inspectors. Which time slot, which inspector do you want? So you can either choose it by time or you can choose it by inspector. And then you just lock it in right there. And then the office will call you and fill out the rest of the information. It will ask you for some information like location of the house and stuff like that. And that's because we can't tell you who's available for that area. Let's say you have an Auburn inspection at 2 o'clock you want, right? Well, if Andy is in Kittery at 9, he's not going to make Auburn by 2 o'clock. So it draws a 20-mile radius around the property that you enter in, so that you know exactly who's available for what time.
Daryl, do you recommend that as we're putting together an offer on a property that we go in and look and see what's available before we do that, so we can actually tell the agent on the other side that we've got something lined up?
I would, but I wouldn't lock it in. And the reason why I say that is because we've had a lot of realtors lock it in when they're making the offer, and and then the inspector loses that time period, and of course that's money to them because they get paid on commission based on, you know, how many inspections they do. And when they've lost that time period, if we see that ahead of time, we reopen the process and allow that time slot to be opened up again. But, you know, sometimes if it's a short window, let's say you went on a contract on a Monday and you want a Wednesday inspection, you lock it up before you went in and the offer doesn't get accepted. Sometimes the agent or the individual buying the house doesn't go in and tell us, and of course the inspector shows up.
Right. Yeah, good point. Okay. So maybe go in, see what the possibilities are, don't book it, and then go in and book it after you're.
And the minute the ink is dry, book it.
Yeah, awesome. This has been awesome. I'm looking forward to, if you don't know, Daryl runs classes. He said that earlier. We'll make sure we keep people updated on when your next classes are. Please keep us updated as well. Great. You can take the class and then you can get a credit every time you go on an inspection. Is that right?
That used to be. That was home inspection 101, home inspection 102. The state put a kibosh to the home inspection 102 aspect of it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
How dare they?
if anybody's interested in that app, just let us know and I'll have Pete reach out to you and send you the link, because it's an invite app only. So you're not going to find it anywhere else other than when we send it to you to invite, and that's for security purposes. And any inspection that we do for you, it stays there for like the next 5 years. So
awesome.
you open up your app, all your inspections will be right there. You open up the address, it'll bring up the inspection, it'll bring up all the labs that were done. Everything's all in one portal for you.
Awesome.
Can you send that to all of us? Or have the
we'll
link
send
sent
it
to all
out.
of us?
We'll send it out, Paige.
Okay, great.
All right, everybody. Hey, thanks a lot. Daryl, have an awesome trip. Thank you so much for all you do. I've really appreciated being in business with you for so long and being able to trust your teams. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks,
for
Daryl.
everybody on this
Thanks,
call,
Daryl.
thank you very much. If anybody is interested in a free business plan review session, if you'd like to do a couple extra transactions a year and like to book an appointment with Kim or I, we'd love to help. And if you have any questions about eXp Realty, we'd love to talk to you about that too. Next week, we have Amy Foley is jumping on to talk about new construction with us. She's got a huge project over at the Downs. So we're excited to hear what's going on over there and get best practices for working with new construction. So that's all we got. Thanks everybody for your time. Really appreciate it.